Welcome to eCommerce Deep Dive, a podcast featuring the biggest players in retail and e-commerce. Your host is John Ghiorso, founder and CEO of Orca Pacific, a Mighty Hive company. For today's episode, John is joined by Will Yen, Director of National Accounts, e-commerce at Pabst Brewing Company. Will and John talk about the state of the rapidly changing online alcohol business. They also discuss regulatory barriers to shipping alcohol and how brewing companies should be thinking about Amazon. Thanks for listening and enjoy the show.
All right. Will, welcome to the show.
Hi, John. Great to be here.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, hey, I wanted to start out maybe a little bit background here in terms of both your career and then Pabst, what you're doing today, and just a little bit of context on the company before we dive into kind of all these industry-specific topics that I have in mind. So.
Yeah, I've been in e-commerce for almost a decade now. So I started my career at Expedia here in Bellevue, and of course, working there, Amazon's just right across the water, kind of blowing up. And I knew at some point if I wanted to expand my e-commerce skill set outside of just the travel hospitality industry, I'd probably have to learn Amazon. And so had an opportunity to work for Warner Brothers, which is kind of where I started working with Amazon vendor management from a Prime Video standpoint. And then the next couple of roles were at Kimberly-Clark and Mattel, P&G, Viacom, Nickelodeon, where I kind of got to expand my skill set in different categories and understand how they operate across GLs. So it was really great opportunities to kind of learn the Amazon business across categories.
That's awesome. Yeah. So clearly an e-commerce veteran, and in a lot of different categories too, which is cool. And then your latest gig, is this the first role you've had in alcohol?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. So totally different muscle here. Working with distributors. So now as a brand, we can't sell directly into Amazon as a vendor, so we don't have a vendor central account or seller central account because we've got to work through distributors, wholesalers who then sell into Amazon.
Yeah, awesome. So tell me a little bit, just for context. I think most people are familiar with Pabst, and I'm sure several other brands, but just for those that aren't, and for those on video, we have a great representation here behind Will of some of the brands. But if you could just give people, especially those on audio, just a view of like what brands do people know? I mean, I know it's national distribution, but there's some, I would say, very regional heavy brands as well under the umbrella. So,
yeah, I think when I first joined, I was kind of surprised at how small of a company we are. So we're only about 300 or 400 people as a company, and you think about PBR, which is kind of like our flagship brand. It's everywhere.
Yeah.
But PBR is kind of the flagship brand nationally. We've also just acquired the Jack Daniel's Country Cocktails portfolio from Brown-Forman, which is kind of like a Mike's Hard Lemonade type of product. And then we also distribute for New Holland, which is like a Dragon's Milk, bourbon barrel aged stout, which is kind of like our craft brand. And then we've got regional brands, to your point, Rainier, which is huge out here in the Pacific Northwest, Lone Star in Texas, Old Style, Colt 45, Schaefer, just a lot of Natty Boh, which is big in Maryland, Schlitz, which I think is big in St. Louis, that area. So lots of regional brands that have really long, brand equity, built in. So that's kind of like our portfolio.
Yeah. No, that's great. And I know it's funny when I went to your website just to check out all the brands you had. I would say personally, like Rainier has more resonance than PBR for me, just because it's has a huge footprint in
Washington. I mean, in Washington, 4 of our top 5 selling SKUs are all Rainier SKUs.
Yeah.
Especially
So
I'm
assuming I'm assuming that's the case in other regional markets too for folks. They go, oh yeah, I know that brand. So, okay, that's great. That's great context. I appreciate it. So then to maybe start kind of more at the macro view of e-commerce and alcoholic beverages, and I think maybe beer and wine, spirits. I know can be a different kind of set of regulations, but all the above. This is such a rapidly changing environment right now, and there's just so much regulatory complication. And I guess from sort of the high level, what is the state of the industry today, and then where do you see it going in 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think for the entire alcohol category last year, I mean, and maybe for most CPG categories, I mean, that whole accelerated 5 years in 1 year type of thing is definitely true,
Yeah.
especially for our categories, where I think in the past, pre-pandemic, we were probably less than 1% of our sales were coming through e-commerce. And now we're anywhere between 2 to 3%.
Okay.
So still very, very small, but rapidly growing as consumer behavior changes. And you think about, especially beer. I mean, it's kind of like the same as any bulky, heavy category. I mean,
Yeah.
30 packs and 24 packs. I mean, those are big, bulky items that you probably don't want to, pick up and move, and probably easier to have delivered or drive and go, pick up whatever. Pickup delivery, that kind of thing. So yeah, it's definitely accelerated. And I think when I look to the future of it, it really is about different, expanded selection, possibly with these dark store type of models that are moving around. So maybe for beer, we've been constricted to just kind of what's in the brick and mortar space, but with dark stores, you can obviously hold more selection, more expanded selection, and so I think that's a big opportunity for e-commerce. And then I think this is a big hot topic, right, for the industry, is seen as more of a marketing channel, a way to capture eyeballs versus just a sales, channel.
So what, I mean, is it, because when I look at this industry, I go, it makes all the sense in the world to ship, especially beer, to your point. Like if people are buying dog food and diapers and, other products online, like, well, why aren't they buying beer online? It's not that they don't want to. It's that there's enough regulatory barriers and complication.
Especially with the distributors, the 3-tier system.
Yeah,
Yep.
exactly. So, I mean, do you, like, the reason, let's say, it's not 10% today, is that really singularly regulatory, or are there other kind of elements at play? Am I oversimplifying that?
I think it's actually, I think you're right about the regulatory piece, because if you look at, let's say, wine and spirits, which is less regulated, and they're able to ship across borders, right? That's why we can subscribe to, like, wine that we love in California, have it shipped to Washington, that kind of thing. Their penetration is much higher. I think it's in the double digits, for sure. So I think a lot of it is regulatory.
Okay, interesting. So, I mean, how do you then see this playing out, as we look maybe 5 years down the road? Do you, because, regulatory stuff can take a very long time to change, if ever. I mean, I think some
Probably
of the laws
not.
govern this are, 100-year-old laws on the books still, like, post prohibition they were written. So, like, in reality, is there, because, most categories, you sort of expect this natural compounding growth. There's really nothing holding that back beyond kind of sophistication on the, retailer side, and then just demand on the customer side. And those two things just connect, and it just kind of organically grows. You've got this very kind of messy middle in alcohol with all this, regulatory complexity. Do you see that substantially changing in the next 5 years, or do you see us kind of just making maybe some slow iterative progress?
Yeah, I think it's the latter. I think it's a slow iterative process, because to your point, like, it hasn't changed in years despite heavy lobbying from a lot of retailers, I think, who would like to open it up a bit more. And I think the problem is also when you have the distributor, it's not a problem, it's just a complication. Right? When you have a distributor model, the efficiencies is kind of like we brew the product, we ship it to our distributors. Distributors, every single touch is just adds more cost. And so if there's a way that Amazon or another retailer can find a way to have a customer order through Amazon, but then maybe it ships directly from the distributor's warehouse, where it doesn't have to touch retail. Take out that component of it. Maybe there's some efficiencies there to help with speed, help with price.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. And I do want to definitely
And
spend
selection.
time. Yeah, for sure. And I want to spend time talking about Amazon because I think Amazon is, if anyone's going to break through regulatory barriers, it's going to be Amazon. But before we do that, I mean, are there, Drizzly, others are getting a lot of buzz right now. Is there anyone that you're looking at as really being disruptive over the next several years in this category outside of Amazon?
Yeah, I think Drizzly, Instacart were surprising to me, at least, coming into this category and getting some of the stats. I mean, they represent a much bigger chunk of the business than Amazon for us. And then GoPuff is probably the true e-commerce. They're not even true now because they acquired Bevmo last year. So they're not kind of like, there's no pure play retailers that we work with out there. So yeah, GoPuff is one I would keep an eye on, or I am keeping an eye
on. And these, this sort of all of the above. What is the value proposition here essentially on the kind of last mile side, that it's really just about who can get the product the fastest to the customer, and then kind of selection, everything else is pricing is kind of fairly like it's just kind of table stakes, and it's really about speed. Is that the?
I think it's speed and it's convenience and it's coverage, because I think about the times where consumers want to order through an e-commerce channel, and it's usually like a last minute kind of thing. They're at a party or they're at a social gathering, and they've someone's run out of beer. Nobody wants to leave the party to get more beer. Those kind of scenarios, and so refrigeration kind of comes into play as well, because if you're going to consume it in the moment, you kind of want it cold, delivered in the moment. So I would say less, at least from what we're saying, less packages are kind of pre-planned, or purchases are pre-planned.
Yeah, that's interesting. So the use case there is actually kind of more similar to like restaurant delivery versus like a traditional sort of consumer packaged good delivery, which you can say, well, I'll need it in a week, and I'll put it in my order for next week.
Yep.
Interesting. So I mean, obviously in alcohol, both those situations exist, but you think that sort of like last minute convenience play is where the most sort of disruption is happening right now.
I think so too. And, when you think about, just the use cases, I mean, I was at a park, maybe I should mention what the name of the park is in Seattle, but they were, I was able to have Prime Now delivered to that park from a Whole Foods in the area to the parking lot. And it was just super convenient, and it was a nice day. And
Hey there. I'm Dave Zimmerman with Orca Pacific. I hope you're enjoying the show. I wanted to let you know this episode is brought to you by Orca Pacific, a Mighty Hive company. We're a full-service agency exclusively focused on Amazon with capabilities for everything a brand needs to succeed on the platform. From advertising strategy, content development and SEO, to merchandising and marketing. If it relates to driving and converting demand on the platform, our dedicated teams are leaders in this space. Our robust suite of services includes expertise on the back end as well, from operational support, demand forecasting and planning, to the right fulfillment options, and higher level strategies like long-term planning, channel management, and access to beta programs. To learn more, visit our website at www.orcapac.com. That's ORCAPAC.com. And a business development manager will get you up to speed on how we can accelerate your Amazon business. Now, back to the show.
Before we hit record, I had asked you, like, is the answer to the Amazon question like, well, there's not much going on, so there's not much to do here to talk about, and you said no. That's like there are sort of some interesting things. Maybe some of them are future state. So maybe just to kind of set the stage today, as a beer brewer, how do you think about Amazon today? And then we'll talk about maybe some of the more interesting future state stuff.
Yeah, I think I kind of use Amazon. I think of Amazon in a couple different ways. I think number one, I think of it as more of a marketing vehicle
Yeah.
to get eyeballs, make sure that we have the best content. It's kind of not using that, not thinking of them as necessarily a sales channel, but more of a marketing channel. Number one, and then number two, thinking of them as best in class in e-com. So if we're talking to like a Walmart or a Target or a Kroger or Albertsons Safeway, another customer, we can take kind of the tenets of the principles of what we learned from Amazon and how they do their algorithm and how it's predicated on search and convenience, selection, price, all those kind of things that we know about as best in class to kind of take to our other customers. So that's kind of the second way I think about Amazon. Yeah. And then the third piece, which I think is really interesting, is kind of like the physical grocery stores, right? I mean, Whole Foods, we don't have as big of a presence in if you're not a craft brewery, right? It's kind of, they're very dedicated to the higher end. I mean, we are in some Whole Foods, but for the most part, they kind of lean that way. So these Amazon Fresh stores that have been, opening up is kind of the third way that, as a true customer, as a true brick and mortar customer.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. And then I think probably, especially in this category, what everyone needs to be thinking about is not what does Amazon today look like, but what does Amazon in 5 years, in 10 years look like? So let's get into that. And where do you think this is all headed? What are you trying to position the company for 5 years out?
I mean, I remember coming in, I started in August with Pabst, and I came in probably, you have your 60-90 or 30-60-90 plan, right? And it was about 90 days. I was like, you know what? I think we need to prep for the eventuality maybe that Amazon is going to acquire mixed use buildings. And hear me out on this one, where they, you think about your typical mixed use building, right? You've got your restaurants and services on the bottom floor. You've got maybe a hotel, conference rooms. You've got living spaces and if they were to own that, pipe it with all their technology, all their private label services, all their data points, like what kind of, if they want to be where every customer works, plays, and lives, I mean, that's kind of like the ultimate test to be in, right? For a brand. Like, why wouldn't you want to be a part of something like that? Where you can have consumers test your products, order your products. You can get such rich data. I mean, obvious privacy issues, right? That's kind of where my head goes at, is we have to start thinking about our product outside of just a retail, a retail setting. And almost think of it differently from a consumer's perspective, right? Where they actually use our product in the kitchen, smart fridges, all those things come into play in a mixed use building. So I actually think that's where Amazon is going to go. If I were
so, like, how do you prepare for that then, as a brand? Like what? I mean, do you just try to sort of be there when the conversation gets more serious, or are you taking tangible steps? Like, what are you actually doing?
Yeah, I think helping helping our company wrap their head around Amazon as not just a retailer, but a technology company, and a company that, if we want to kind of be first movers in any space with, got to kind of have to think about where they might be going, so that we can prepare ourselves with, the right packages, the right selection, the right pricing, the right distribution models. If we're going to get into, let's say, a space where we can ship like a non-alc, right? You think of like the Athletic Brewings of the world, and how I think the stat is like 2/3 of millennials or something like that is cutting out alcohol. And so how do you think about innovation that way as well, is kind of what I'm prepping.
Yeah, interesting. One of the topics on here, it's specific, but I'm really curious to hear your thoughts. Amazon Business, is there opportunity there? How do you view How do you view that lane?
Yeah, so I think we talk a lot about distributors, working with distributors, wholesalers, and retail customers like Amazon, that kind of thing. But these distributors also have these distributor order portals or catalogs, where let's say I own a restaurant or a bar down the street, I need to reorder beer. I can go into the distributor's portal, order beer. So there's platforms out there that are trying to be the Amazon, like a Pro-V. Or 750, I think is their name, 770. But basically, they're trying to compile all these order catalogs into one kind of search engine like Amazon, so that if I'm a bar or restaurant, I can search all these different catalogs in my area to see which one's got the best pricing, what's hot, best sellers, and you start building, a lot of that algorithmic. Is that the
yeah?
Goodness into that type of experience. So I think the Amazon business piece is really interesting because obviously these restaurants and bars need to reorder cleaning supplies and napkins and plates and all that stuff that a restaurant needs. Why couldn't they order their alcohol through that same system?
Is Amazon Business in that category today? Or is this a future state thing?
This is a future state thing.
Yeah.
But I think it does go back to the regulatory piece.
Yeah, I figured. Yeah, because I know they do a decent amount actually in restaurant supply, but it's all the sort of hard goods side of things right now. I believe. I mean, they may do some consumables, but I assume that that's mostly handled through this sort of more traditional distributor that the restaurant's using. But yeah, I mean, I think it's so interesting because so much of this stuff just fundamentally makes sense, but it's all just like how does the
when you actually get into the weeds,
is this legal?
Do you remember Amazon Wine? Do you remember Amazon Wine a couple of years ago?
Yeah, did they deprecate it eventually?
They deprecated it. Yep. Yeah. Same thing with their their DoorDash, Uber Eats, whatever. Amazon restaurants was that?
Amazon restaurants, which actually I used all the time. But yeah, they got rid of that one just because of profitability. Yeah. It was just hemorrhaging money, and they just could not figure out a way. There was no profitability in sight for them. It was just like a never-ending, black hole, which I guess, for a certain type of startup, that's okay. But I think Amazon just said this isn't for us right now.
So they know there's something there with the alcohol, food, and beverages. It's just, how do they do it in a way that's going to be profitable? And I think that's why the mixed use thing also makes a lot of sense to me too, because you're able to ship pallets, right, of items. Let's say you have a mixed use building and you've got people living in it. 80% of them use toilet paper on a regular basis, and maybe you give them the private label one and they get a really good discount. Maybe it's a membership to this building, right? And they pay a flat fee and they get all the toilet paper, cleaning supplies, laundry detergent, all that stuff that they can use.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, another way of it's not the exact same thing as what you're saying, but another way of thinking about this is basically, instead of literally having, owning the building or having a space in each building, you just have
pantry,
a level of FC density. Yeah, where there's always in every city, there's a fulfillment center every 2 blocks, basically. So, the top 5,000 SKUs are available in 30 minutes for free because they're a block down the street.
And I had heard a couple of years ago, and I don't know if they've gone away from this, but are they still looking at personal residences to rent out their extra garage space or shed space to be mini micro fulfillment centers? Have you heard anything more about that?
I haven't heard about that, but I mean, I think it's a fairly reliable sort of prediction to say that in the future, and I'll be vague on the timeline here, but in the future, Amazon will go from having hundreds of, million square foot facilities to thousands or tens of thousands of, 10,000, 20,000,
that's where it's at.
Facilities. Yeah. and I mean, they'll eventually have both. It'll be hub and spoke, but I think that, ultimately they're looking to micro fulfillment centers is a huge part of this goal to eventually get to 30-minute delivery windows, basically in a profitable, scalable way. So
because I think about the subscription piece too. We know, having worked in other categories in CPG, how just sticky that thing can be. Subscribe and save. To have no beer equivalent is, it's rough. It's hard to grow that stickiness without that, and that brand loyalty.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's not to keep like beating this to death, but I mean, it is interesting because so many of these things, would work, except they're just not doable from a regulatory piece. And I don't know if you have, I don't want to, kind of push you into an uncomfortable place, in just in terms of commenting on it, but I'm curious if you have any insight into the regulatory environment. Like I do think that if anyone can break down these walls, it's going to be Amazon. And 10 plus years ago, Steve Case, the founder of AOL, wrote this really interesting book called The Third Wave. And basically the idea, and I think he was spot on, is that in the future, we're now in the future, by the way, because it was like 10 years in the future, 10 years ago. His concept was that large technology companies will get big enough where they will start seriously running into other institutions of society, primarily government institutions, and that to continue to grow, they will start to have to genuinely work with government in a much more material way than they were previously. And I think I think Amazon, I mean, clearly there's stuff with Google and Facebook and, antitrust and all kinds of things. But with Amazon, I think that they're genuinely reaching a place where these highly regulated categories, if they don't start to actually, move the narrative here in some ways and move the laws and the regulatory environment, they're going to hit a wall where they just can't grow anymore. And I mean, it's alcohol, it's pharmacy, it's, I think eventually cannabis, it's automotive. I mean, these are all super, super regulated categories where there's clearly, price, convenience, selection. Like those things don't change whether you're buying a car or, a prescription drug or a case of beer. You still want those things. It's just they're much harder to deliver. So I do think that if anyone can kind of push through this, it's going to be Amazon. But I don't know. I mean, there's lots of other entrenched interests and, folks that are very, I would say, very good at kind of keeping regulatory barriers in place because they benefit from those. But do you have any kind of, we don't even have to go 5-year, 10-year, because I think a lot of these things have to be decades-long initiatives for Amazon or they're just not going to be worth pursuing. But decades out, do you have any opinions on that? I know we're getting into a little science fiction, but
I wouldn't presume to know all the legal intricacies of the regulatory stuff. But I will say that after learning that each store that they open up, or even each Prime Now kind of fulfillment center that they open up, has to have a liquor license in order to sell beer and wine and spirits. And so I think having that liquor license really does help them think through what else they can do with that liquor license within the confines of that state. So it doesn't have to be something that's at the national level, but even within states, I think they could do some very interesting things. So that's why I'm keeping my eye on the Amazon Fresh store format.
Totally. And this is a kind of a slightly different use case, but a lot of people don't realize Amazon has some fulfillment centers in some states that fulfill alcohol, but because of regulatory issues, they literally also have to be retailers.
Correct.
But they're like fulfillment centers kind of in the middle of nowhere, like on some industrial, lane in a business park, where if you really wanted to, for some reason, as a consumer, you can like walk up to the counter and buy a case of beer. No one ever does because it's super inconvenient out of their way. But like they have, it's technically like a store that, they sell 5 cases of beer a week out of, and then the rest of the volume is all done, via delivery. But
well, going back to the subscription piece, I mean, even for non-alcohol categories like, Pampers or diapers or whatever, I'm surprised, and maybe this is in the works for them at these some of these fresh stores, is let's say I subscribe and save to something, can I pick up that subscription for the month,
sure.
Get that savings, but instead of having it delivered, maybe I have it ready and waiting at that store level.
Yeah. I think that the BOPIS thing is clearly worked very well for Amazon's competitors, and they just don't have in some ways
store count.
Yeah, exactly. Thousands of stores to do this from. So I think they've seen now, like, they're going to have to compete with that type of offering somehow, and these fresh stores they're opening now may be part of the plan to get there. Will, is there anything else like that we didn't touch on that you think our audience would be interested to kind of hear about?
Yeah, I think being new to the category, as I thought through my 5 rocks, I can kind of share what those are. But I think if folks think about category and how new it is for e-commerce specifically, I mean, it has such a broad scope, right? So my first rock is about getting content right. So thinking it through, like the PIM process. So that's bucket number 1. Bucket number 2 is how do I support, our Walmart and Target and omni-channel teams, Kroger, Albertsons, Safeway. Number 3, I've got to think about internal kind of e-commerce master classes, right? I've done a couple, just talking through what is e-commerce, how big is it, how does it work, all those kinds of things. And then the 4th piece is new channels. So the Instacart, the Drizzlies, the GoPuffs of the world. And then the 5th bucket is Amazon, and using them as I mentioned before, right? As a marketing channel, as kind of best in class for e-commerce, and just thinking through what they can be from a technology partner standpoint. So I think those things were all kind of different teams at the companies I was at before. Like those would all be, but this is all, under me for now. And it's just, the opportunities are just so wide open in BevAlc. Because it's just been such a small part of the business. Nobody really touched it. So it's kind of like, it's nice having that almost like startup kind of ownership. You can take it wherever you want, and you can dictate the strategy and dictate the processes and have a really big voice. So
that's super cool. And it's interesting because, like, in a way it's kind of like rolling the clock back. I mean, it's just, it is one of the categories that is like one of the last holdouts.
I mean, I've worked in toys, right? Where I think when I was at Mattel, I mean, in toys category was probably 25-30% Amazon, right? That was before Toys R Us. And so you think about after Toys R Us, how much penetration Amazon has in that category. Think about CPG, right? We're talking double digits now for those categories. So I think Amazon will eventually get there. It's just a matter of when.
Well, that's great. Will, how can people connect with you? Like, follow you on social, any of those things you want to?
Yeah, just LinkedIn. That's probably the easiest way to find me.
Yeah.
My hair will look a little different in the profile picture, but
I think that a lot of people are in that position post-COVID. So, hey, it's been great having you on. Really fascinating discussion, and we'll throw some of this stuff in the show notes. So, thanks again, Will.
Yeah, thanks, John.